Hey, welcome to the Integrate This EdTech podcast. I'm David Berner, joined by co-host Jeremy Mikla, and today we have with us Dr. Sheldon Eakins. Uh, you can also see Sheldon is an avid sneaker collector there too. Pretty awesome background. And Sheldon actually and I, we kind of briefly met at ISTE because we were both in attendance for one of Dr. Valenzuela's presentations. But Sheldon has a ton of work that he's done as a school administrator and educational consultant and leadership coach. And he's also got several books. And we want to talk about some of those things with you today. But Sheldon, do you mind kicking things off for us and just kind of giving us your story from, where you started to how you got to where you got to today?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me on the show, David and Jeremy. It is an honor and a pleasure. A little bit about myself, as David said, behind me, if you're watching this, there's a bunch of Jordans behind me, and I'll start there since it's what was brought up. I am an avid collector of Jordans, particularly Jordan ones. So I have probably about 40 of those. Uh, I didn't have enough lockers, so I need to get some more. So there's some of them in my closet, but then I also have some other Jordan retros, twos and threes and fours and those kind of things. So I am a collector. But outside of that, when I was in the 12th grade, I decided I wanted to be a teacher. I had a really cool history teacher. His name was Mr. Fielder. He was just like the coolest guy ever. And I was like, man, I want to be just like him. I love the way he taught history. I love the way he told stories. And he was also my basketball coach. So I was like, I want to do that. And so I went to college and I majored in social science education so I could become a history teacher. I had the opportunity to become a history teacher and also I had the opportunity to coach as well. Unfortunately, I've had a chance to win a championship. I've made it to playoffs, but one year I did make it to the championship and won the championship. So that was fun. And it's just been my journey. Like fresh out of college, I made it to the Virgin Islands where I first started teaching there. And that was kind of like my first introduction to cultural responsive teaching. Because, yeah, I got a lot of theory and I even went to historically black college, but there was still a lot of things that just culture wise that I had to pick up and I had to learn. It just wasn't something that I just could learn in a book. And so a lot of those experiences really kind of honed the way I approach education. So from being a history teacher, I decided to go ahead and get my master's in leadership and had the opportunity to run a couple schools as a school principal. And I said, you know what, master's is cool, but I want to keep going. And my goal initially was to move into higher education. I said, okay, I'm going to be a professor. That was the goal. I was like, I knew I didn't want to be in the classroom. So I got my PhD in K through 12 studies and moved into higher education, which took me to Idaho. I never would have thought I would end up in Idaho, but it happened. You know, it's one of those things. It was during that time when I was just putting in applications everywhere just because I was trying to get a job. I was trying to move into higher ed, and Idaho State called me and they interviewed me. I actually had forgotten that I had an interview or that I had to put an application in until they reached out a few months later. And yeah, I got the job, moved to Idaho, but then I realized I missed the kids. Like it was cool, but working with adults, don't get me wrong, I enjoy working with adults and I like that, but I still like to be around children. And so I got tapped into the local reservation out there, the Shoshone and Bannock tribes, and they asked me to work as their special education director. So I spent about 3 years working as a SPED director. And being a black man in Idaho, I was struggling with a lot of things when it came to how I was being treated and how I respond to treatment. And it's not like it was just racist; it was just a lot of subtle stuff. A lot of people just ignorance. They just hadn't had a lot of experience with interacting with folks like me, and so I was just trying to navigate a lot of things. And started a podcast. So I started a podcast back in 2018. It's called Leading Equity. We have, let's see, I just published episode 432, 33, somewhere around there at this point. And it's just been a journey to where I've had the opportunity to meet some great and amazing people and learn from so many folks and do all this research and just kind of keep me up to date. It's provided me opportunities to become a consultant. So I do run a consulting firm called Purposeful Teaching Academy. Had the opportunity to write books in addition to that. Currently, I do consult, but I also I live here in Phoenix now. So I did do my time in Idaho. I love Idaho. It just wasn't for me, and I decided that let's move back to a larger area. So I'm in Phoenix. I've been here for about 2 years, and currently I supervise a behavior support program here in South Phoenix.
Cool. And just out of curiosity, you mentioned the podcast. As you've kind of moved into the consulting and you've done the podcast, those are somewhat simultaneous, right? So you had started the podcast. You said 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
And
I started. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm just curious, like how that kind of informs some of the things that you're doing along that same trajectory of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I never started the podcast with any kind of business or goals like that in mind. I was just trying to navigate the world. So, like, I would have students come up to me and say, "Oh, I feel like I've been mistreated. Oh, somebody said something to me. I didn't know how to respond, and I didn't know what to tell them because I grew up in the South, and growing up in the South, things are a lot different. Uh, the way that you're treated by folks that do not look like me is very blatant, it's very open, and like but when I was out there, it was like a lot of stuff that was very subtle. It was like passive aggressive type of comments and things like that, or just a lot of assumptions that were made based off of stereotypes. So I wanted to learn how to not only figure out life for myself, for my students, for my own children, but I wanted to share it to the world. And it wasn't long before people started to reach out and listen to it. And it was like, oh, I remember the very first keynote. Again, I was not planning. I'm not a speaker like this at this time. This is not something I was doing. I was just legit just trying to share content. And I had someone reach out and say, hey, I heard that you work with Native American population. We are at a district where there's a huge population demographic wise of students that are part of this tribe. Would you come and speak to our group? Because the students do not look like the staff. And so, yeah, that was my first gig. I didn't even know how to chart. I didn't know how to set up. I didn't know anything as far as like the business side of stuff, but I came on out there and I didn't plan. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't plan my travels. This was in like a rural town in Oklahoma. And I just assumed that I could just call a taxi in the morning or Uber and get my way up from the hotel to the venue. And then when I started checking the Uber app, I realized, wait, there's no Uber out here. Like, it was like you just assume it was nationwide. I thought it was a thing, and there was no Uber. So then I'm going to the hotel guest. I'm like, can you, or at least the hotel information? I'm asking them, I need to get to this place. How do I get there? She's like, well, there's one taxi. You can call it. Here's the number, and they gave me the number, but it just happened to be the day that that person was off. So again, there's one taxi, and he was off that day. So I'm like, okay, I'm frantic. I have to get about an hour's way. So I'm like, okay, is there Enterprise? Is there a rental place? And so I found a rental car place, but again, I needed a way over there to the rental car place, which was about 2 miles down the road. So I literally asked hotel guests as they were eating the breakfast, complimentary breakfast. I'm asking people, tapping on them on the shoulder. And about the third person, I asked him, he's like, oh, I'm an educator too. I sell resources, ed tech, blah, blah, blah. I'll run you over to Enterprise. So he took me to Enterprise. I got me a rental car, drove over to this venue. I was late, but I drove to the venue, and that was my first experience. So I learned a lot. I learned about billing. I learned about making sure that you plan your itineraries correctly. You can't just assume stuff will be there and available for you. I mean, it was just a big lesson, but it just kind of things took off from there. And I just started doing more and more work. And again, people listen to the show. So a lot of the business and the consulting partnerships that I've created have been as a result of either a book, but before that, it was a lot of it came from the podcast.
Sheldon, I mentioned a little bit before we came on, David and I are both based out of Minnesota. And there is really, and as an attendee of a Lutheran church in Minnesota, there's really nothing more Minnesotan Lutheran than potluck.
Yes.
Our whole lives in Minnesota at times seem to revolve around that. And it brings us I guess it brings me to my question here about your book. What are you bringing to the potluck? You know, I think it just seems like a fantastic metaphor of everyone has their own backgrounds and experiences and skill sets and talents and in experiences that they bring to the table. You know, what kind of struck you with that metaphor to lead you to write a book about that?
I'm glad you brought this up because I'm really excited to talk about it. But I want you to follow me, okay? Think about it as a metaphor. So the original title for this book, before I started working with Solution Tree, was "Don't Bring Box Macaroni to the Potluck." That was the original title. Okay, and it followed. So follow me. I see you smiling, and so the challenge was, and the idea behind it was, again, kind of like you said. I grew up church. Every week we had potluck. That was the expectation. And you knew the go-to places, or you knew what dishes to get from, because the regular folks. Okay, Sister Johnson, she's gonna have her famous sweet potato this, and Brother Jones, he's gonna bring in his mac and cheese. Like, we knew what to expect when we showed up to these potluck. Everybody brought their go-to dish. They put their own flair, they put their swag into it, they put their elbow into it, if that makes sense, right? And so if you happen to stumble across a box macaroni casserole, something very basic that it didn't take a lot of effort into, you boil some water, you mix a little powder and the noodles, and wow, voila, you got your dish. And it usually would be the dish that was left over, right? So everything else is gone, and you might see a scoop that was taken out of this boxed macaroni. So my mindset behind this, when I was thinking about creating a sense of belonging, if I'm a school leader, what happens when I bring in, like, this a special event, and I bring in something that's very simple and doesn't seem like I put a lot of effort into it. So when we're trying to create a sense of belonging where every student feels accepted, supported, and included, we have to bring our best. We should not be trying to rush through. We should not be trying to, in a pinch, put something together and say we did it. No, we're going to bring in our famous, whatever that might be. So that could be your famous wings. It could be your famous lasagna, or whatever casserole it is. But we're bringing our best to it. Here's the challenge. People kept thinking, like, all the peer reviews, they were sitting there reading, oh, box macaroni, but I love box macaroni. I love, like, sometimes that's all I can do. And then it was like, well, when it comes to equity, if if that's all you can afford is box macaroni, that should be okay. And I kept trying to explain and help folks understand this is metaphor. I'm not saying literally boxed macaroni. I'm trying to explain to you, let's keep it real. Box macaroni is a quick thing. That's not, you don't have to buy a lot of ingredients. You literally buy a box and you boil some water. So if that's our approach to education, that's a problem. That's not creating an intentional approach to a sense of belonging. So we went back and forth with the title. We settled on, what are you bringing to the potluck? Which again goes to, are we bringing our best effort into the potluck? As you said, Jeremy, that you're used to going to potlucks every week, or other folks that are listening, they're used to going to potlucks every week. And if you're one of those contributors that brings that potluck dish, maybe you have your go-to, versus are you bringing in just plates, napkins, and silverware, or maybe bring in a juice. All right. So what are you bringing to the potluck when it comes to your effort in creating a sense of belonging?
Yeah, and I can see how that would be really important, even, to continue with the metaphor a little bit. I like my chili nice and spicy. And
Okay.
so, and if I'm going to bring chili to, that potluck, I want people to taste it as I think it should be tasted. And if it challenges them outside of their comfort zone, you know, I think that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the point. Like, if it's challenging, that's great. But again, it's what you like, right? You like your chili spicy, and I like spicy chili too. So but again, it's you putting in your flair, you're putting a little bit of love, sprinkling some love in that chili, and that's what you're presenting. And so that was the whole point of the title. The
Right.
book, it does use references to ingredients, and kind of the whole potluck theme is throughout the book. But again, some people were kind of taking it too literal and not understanding the metaphor, which I just, going through and having to try to explain it. I could understand the publisher standpoint. But yeah, that was the original title.
But I think it even works to challenge people's perceptions and assumptions in a school climate, in a school culture, that it's okay to bring in a little bit of spice to that as well.
Yes. And that's the thing. Like sometimes we get hung up on semantics because we're in a society where like certain words can't be said, certain things can't be done, or you're going against quote unquote traditional practices. And here's the thing. When COVID happened, I honestly thought this was an opportunity for us to revisit what our educational system looks like, because this was a time where a lot of folks realized, oh, wait, there's a lot of people that don't have technology, or they don't have devices, or they don't have access to drive to the school to pick up their packets and then come back. Like there was a lot of stuff that people discovered. I said, okay, now here's the opportunity that we have to revisit and look at our education. And there were some changes, and there are a lot of changes that did take place, but slowly over time, our educational system has kind of crept back into the original framework of what you grew up with and what I grew up with. It's still prevalent. So when you are trying to do things that goes against the grain, that puts a little bit of spice or flair into the system, those things get challenged. Those type of things are questioned, and you look like an oddball. But at the end of the day, Jeremy, I know that you're doing the best that you can, or you're thinking about the students first. But just because your approach isn't what everyone else is used to, it looks like you're going against the grain, and people want to challenge you, and there's all this pushback. But I'm with you, man. Why if our test scores are the way they are, and we complain about the opportunity and achievement gaps, and like these are conversations that we have on a daily basis, why not try something different?
Yeah, and one of the things too, Sheldon, is you spent time both as a teacher and as administrator, and so you've obviously seen like a lot of classrooms, right? So in classroom management, you have your book, Meaningful Classroom Management. And how do you shift thinking from like building a culture versus just like a more control or rules, like a bunch of rules? The rules are there, everybody just follows the rules. What's the difference between how either culture or control impacts classroom management?
Good question. Like right now, our schools, and it's interesting because a lot of us are getting back to. Well, I don't know how y'all are as far as Minnesota when y'all start school, but here in Phoenix, we're starting like this week. Like a lot of schools are starting this week and next. I see your face, so I'm assuming y'all have a little bit of time.
September here, so.
But we're starting like tomorrow. Like a lot of schools, like I know people who have started this week, or they're starting this week. My son he actually starts on Friday, and then my daughter, she starts next Monday. So like the back to school conversations, even though we get upset when we're in Walmart and we start seeing back to school supplies happening like in May and stuff, but the point is, we start talking about students' first day of school. You on those kids, you don't let up, and otherwise you're gonna lose them. Like that's the conversation that I was taught. That's a conversation a lot. I hear these conversations all the time. The idea of make sure that they know exactly who you are, and otherwise you will not have the control of the classroom. So what happens is our students, they learn compliance. So they'll do stuff for you because if I don't do it, there's going to be a consequence behind it. So some of them might be operating in a level of fear. Some of them might just be operating in a level of compliance. There is no real buy-in into this classroom. And so what I talk about in my book is revisiting or re-looking at how we do our classroom management. And I don't like to utilize the term classroom management. I prefer something more of a community engagement, a community agreement, rather, is how I like to approach it, because that's, to me, is more student centered. So like if we already on the first day of school have established all the norms and expectations, raise your finger to go to the bathroom, and cross your fingers if you need to do this, like all these different signs or protocols. And again, if a student doesn't do what you're asking them to do, then they're being defiant, maybe, or maybe they're being disruptive. Let's look at things a little different. And if I have some time, I want to give a little bit more context behind the basis of the book. I did some research on this gentleman. His name was Gert Hofstede. Okay, he was someone that did a lot of research back in the 70s on the company IBM. All right, so this is a while ago because it's IBM, right? And so what he did was he noticed the different behaviors of the employees, and he came up with these cultural dimensions. And out of the cultural dimensions, one of them was the individualism versus collectivism. And what he found was in the United States and England, some other countries, we rely heavily on the individual approach, right? So personal achievement. So when we think about our educational system, we are big on GPAs. We are big on the valedictorian, the salutatorian, the top of the class. So it's often individually based. It's all about the direct communication and independency. So it's not uncommon for a teacher to tell students, okay, go back to your seat and work on this quietly or work on this individually. So what happens when a student that gets up out of their seat, goes to one of his best friends and says, hey, Johnny, let me help you out. Or what did you get on number 3? Or they're just trying to, like, they're whispering to that person, and the teacher sees, oh, I told y'all to sit at your desk quietly, and now you're out of your seat talking to your best friend, and now and so there could be a back and forth exchange, and it could escalate. What Gert Hofstede understood was there are folks that come from a collective background, right? So even though the United States relies heavily on the individualism, there's a group of folks or community or culturally, there's folks that prefer group work. They prefer harmony in group. They collaborate and learn, like, everything, your stuff is my stuff. And that's their personality. That's their cultural background. And so there's a clash. So sometimes there's a mismatch between what a teacher is identifying as misbehavior versus a student's preference or what they're more familiar with. I give the example, sometimes we talk about how we have the expectations for students to look you in the eye and shake your hand. Like, that's Western norms. Like, when you greet somebody, you look them in the eye, firm handshake. But then there's other cultures that, no, that's not how we show a level of respect. We actually bow our heads to our elders, or we actually don't look them in the eye. And so sometimes we misinterpret behavior. And as we misinterpret that behavior, then students can end up getting in trouble, which they may not have had to be getting into trouble, but it's just more of a misinterpretation of what the behavior is. So that's what the book is all about, is reframing a way that we can balance the collective students and your individual students. So I'm not saying, oh, just shift everything over to the collective work. No, we need to make sure that we're having a balance, and not 80 or 90% of the stuff is single work and all the students are walking to the classroom and they're all sitting in rows. No, is there any type of opportunities for them to work together in groups? Because there's a group of students that prefer that style or approach to learning.
I like how you laid out the tension there between the two different approaches or cultural backgrounds, and how when students come into a classroom, and actually I thought of this too, is because, especially when you get more into the upper level, right, like high school, things like that, students are moving from one class to the next, right, throughout the day, and so there's all those shifts that are constantly happening throughout the day, even just moving from one teacher to the next. So as you look at those things that are in tension, or like if you have, let's say, students move from a teacher that's more like focused on the individualism side, and then next period they move to one where it's like more on the collectivist side, just from the teacher perspective, right? As they do that, is there a way to help those things kind of like work together? Or how would you approach, like, let's say you're going to take all those teachers that had those different approaches, what would you have them work on, or to help them understand the opposite side, I guess is what I'm saying.
Self-awareness starts first, right? So in my book, I talk about, like, what are you more? What do you lean more towards, right? Because we tend to teach the way we were taught, right? And so when we become educators, we probably pull some of the stuff that we used to do, or some of the tactics that we used to utilize in school. Like I remember when I first started teaching, one of the things I used to do was I would tell the kids, all right, handful of y'all are misbehaving, y'all are talking out of place, y'all talking out of turn. No recess for everybody, right? So like the whole class gets punished because there's 3 or 4 kids and I was one of those 3. When I was a kid, I was one of those 3 or 4 kids that would ruin recess for everybody, right? Or I would put kids names on the board, and then I put a check next to them, and they did more, and I put another check. Like these are things that I grew up on, and I was utilizing these same strategies when I first started teaching, right? Because that was what I was familiar with. Yeah, again, I went to teacher school, but I pulled from my bag of stuff that I knew I was very familiar with. So I talk about, let's identify what are some of the tactics that you prefer, or what are some of the strategies that you prefer in your classroom. And so it asks you a series of questions. Okay, do you do a lot of worksheets? Do you do a lot of this? Do you do a lot of that? And then that teacher can determine, okay, you know what, I'm actually more collectivist leaning, or you know what, I'm actually a little bit more individualistic leaning. I would start there, get some self-awareness and find out where you are, where are some of the areas for growth. And then once I decide, okay, I'm more individual leaning, okay, I need to bring in some more collectivism work, or vice versa. But that does take some time to be intentional again with your approach. So we're assuming, David, that these individuals like you're talking about are wanting to see where they're at and wanting to be a little bit more intentional with their approaches, so that they are mixing in a good flavor. And then also you can ask your students these same questions, because every classroom is going to look different, like you said. So you may have a roster where you have 80% of your students are more on the collectivist side. You might have 20%, you know what I'm saying? So you can also ask these same type of questions to your students in the beginning of the school year, so that you can grasp a better concept of, okay, so my third hour English class looks this way, but my fourth hour English class looks the other way. And so now I'm being able to provide strategies and stuff, activities, things in my classroom that are going to really tap into the majority. And then also I'm bringing in a nice little balance, but that balance is from an equitable standpoint, where I'm looking at, okay, I have this certain percentage, and now this is the type of work I'm going to give. I bet you if you are more intentional in that approach, you will see a difference with the engagement that you're getting, with the amount of collaboration, or whatever that looks like for you, if we are intentional with our approach.
Yeah, I really get what you're saying here, and I think a lot of it is, and I'm going to go back to where you were first talking about, you're going to start teaching the way that the teachers that you looked up to taught you. And I definitely remember that, and I greatly admired the teachers that I had throughout high school, and I did model myself when I started teaching history as well. That it was very much the same mode, and I remembered the stories, and I loved the stories, and I shared the stories. But then, boy, it was a lot of doing notes up at the in front of the class, and the kids had to write down everything I wrote down. And, if a kid misbehaved, it's send them out into the hallway, or it's, and then find time to talk to them later kind of thing. But I think it probably took me maybe 4 or 5 years into my teaching career when I started to have a little bit bigger perspective than just what I was doing, and put that focus more on what was the experience of the kids in my class. And I think when I did that, it was more about creating those relationships with the students to begin with, making sure that they felt like they belonged in the class, and starting to make changes, like you even said, hour by hour, sometimes just knowing the makeup of the class that you have, which I think that that sense of belonging that kids start to feel in that class is really what's going to connect them to that learning. And I think where I'm going with this here is, you've got a consulting thing, the Purposeful Teaching Academy, going on. Like, is that kind of who you're, the type of teacher you're looking to target, the type of school culture that you want to get invited into, or is it a bigger audience than that for your platform?
It At the end of the day, belonging. Let's start there. So I do a lot of belonging work, and again, making sure that each student feels accepted, supported, and included. That's the goal. We want them to have all three of those things. not just feeling accepted, not just feeling supported, not just feeling included. Because there's a James Baldwin talks about, if you're going to include someone, how are you including someone? Are you including them into a burning house, right? So if I'm including students into this culture community that's not good, what does that mean? So it's important that we are making sure that they feel all three of those things. So I approach it from a sense of belonging, which does include how we approach our classrooms and also how we approach our leadership. So you mentioned two different books. One book is more for the teacher side of things, and the other book is so the potluck book is more for the leadership, and the meaningful classroom management is going to be more for the teacher side of things. But if we combine all of that, and from my consulting side of things, that's the ultimate approach, is creating a sense of belonging in your school.
Yeah, and there's a lot of professional learning that's out there, and I know David and I do provide some of that to teachers in schools in our different regions of Minnesota. But what's a principal if they choose to bring you in, or an administrator if they bring you into their building? What are they going to get from you that they can't find somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I try to. So first of all, I'm not one of those consultants that's abrasive, that's going to tell you, oh, everything you're doing is wrong, and y'all are a bunch of, why are y'all here? Why y'all should never be in front of kids. I've seen consulting like that, and unfortunately, but my goal is, one, not going to be a sit and get. One of the things I have found has been scenarios. So over my years, people are constantly asking me for scripts, because there's different situations that are realistic, and they ask me, give me word for word what I'm supposed to say. And I said, okay, I can help you with certain things, but let's walk through it. So a lot of trainings that I give nowadays, let's just say it's how to make sure students feel included, right? And so I'll talk to them about, okay, here's a scenario, how would you approach it? And so sometimes they're working in groups, sometimes they're working individually. It just kind of depends, and we'll break that down. A lot of them, a lot of the work that I do, people want to know how to respond in situations. So not only do I support them in that way, and then I also talk about, well, how can we be proactive as well? So we're not just waiting for something to happen, but we're also looking at it from, okay, again, I created a community where students feel as if they could be themselves, not just at home, not two different people. They get to be themselves at school, and they get to be themselves at home as well. How do we create that community and culture? So that's what a principal would get. I would work with them in regards to creating some buy-in, and then not just buy-in, ownership from their staff, because it's going to require some change. We sometimes people will say stuff like, "Oh, we've always done it this way." And so now you're coming in and you're asking them to change, to look at different perspectives, look at things differently from the lens of your students and their families. And so that's going to require some pushback. It just always does. But I support school leaders in that capacity of, like, okay, here's a change, here's a structure that we're going to use, here's the vision that we're going to create, and then here's the ownership that you're going to put in with your whole entire school community, and let's do this work. So that's what's going to be different or unique from maybe some of the others out there.
Yeah, and Sheldon, you're obviously in front of leaders a lot now, right? If we could take you back for a second to your school administrator days, what surprised you the most from that? Like when you first started, like what was something about that role that just surprised you?
The first thing that stood out is biases. I was in a place. So my second school that I was at, it was in Oregon actually, and I just remember there was, okay. I'll give you an example, because I was making some assumptions, and I really had to look into things differently. So I showed up to school one day, and again, Oregon's very agricultural based. I mean, lush trees. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And I had a parent. They came to the school with a wheelbarrow full of watermelons, and they came up to me, and he said, Mr. Eakins, I have all these watermelons for you. And I, again, was a little thrown off because like, what is he coming at me for about these watermelons? Like, I identify as a black person, and that's a stereotype. And so I honestly thought he was coming at me wrong in my mind. But then the more I talked, so I was kind of like, what? And I guess he could tell something was off, but then I could see it in his face, in his demeanor. He really didn't mean it. He literally had extra watermelons. He was offering me the principal. Actually, it didn't matter what I looked like. He would have still offered the principal extra watermelons. And so that was one of the things I had to realize is that not everybody is coming at you in a way that might be deemed as offensive. A lot of times people don't mean anything by certain things, like stuff that they do. They had the best intentions, and he was one of the most supportive parents on campus. Like he used to come by, fix stuff, handyman style, wouldn't charge. Like he was a stay at home dad, so he would just do a lot of things around the school. And I just didn't know him at that much. It was one of our first encounters, and I had to realize my biases, my assumptions about someone, little information, I don't know enough. Maybe really spend a little bit more time to think about what their approach is or where they're coming from with how they're interacting with me. It doesn't always, you don't always have to jump to this defensive mode, but it could be some genuine intentions behind things.
Sure. And the other question I have for you too is like you obviously were there steeped in, in the school day to day, working. What's something that you feel like you could not have learned from the outside looking in, or maybe like even, for people who make assumptions about schools and how they operate, what's something that you could really only learn or take it more broadly or maybe just individually if you want to, but what could you not learn about schools unless you are actually working in one?
I would say this is maybe something that you don't get taught in class or in school, like teacher or principal school, is the importance of having students or sorry, staff that genuinely care about your kids. I didn't realize how important that was. I've had some really bad teachers in my experience that were legitimately just trying to catch checks. They needed a job and not necessarily this is a career or something that they were passionate about, or kids were something that they were passionate about. And I learned that from a few situations where I just knew they weren't the best fit. Sometimes people interview well. You only get like an hour or so with somebody. Let's say it's an hour, and you got the resume, and that's a bit all you have. Of course, the references are going to be people that they've selected, so there's a bias there when you call that person to check in. So learning the importance of whatever your vision is, because if you're a school leader, I'm just going to assume that you want the best for your kids. I'm just assuming that you're not just trying to collect a check, but you actually have some sort of passion and drive to create a community or a generation, future generations of folks that are going to be very pivotal in the society. Who knows? You might have a future president, you might have future Congress folks, whatever. But just making sure that you are staffed or surrounded by people that genuinely love kids, and if you have that, that makes such a difference versus having individuals that are literally there just because they need to be there and they need to pay their light bills.
Yeah. So, Sheldon, one of the things that I know that you have on the horizon here is you're working on an app, combining some different ideas together. That's not quite ready for prime time yet, although it's very near on the horizon. You want to give us a little insight into what that's about?
I love the show. Y'all are awesome. So here's yes. Thank you for setting me up with that question. So here's the thing. As I mentioned earlier about the collectivism versus the individualism, I've noticed our society in the United States is heavily leans towards the individualism, right? So again, a student is looked at as the top of their class, and kids are taught to compete for individual rankings and individualism. So to get the best scholarships, to get the best this or the best that, like that's what as parents we tell our kids we come up in this competitive nature. However, again, like I said, there are students that are from the collectivist background, and so they operate a little differently. So, like for example, if you ask a student, "Hey, I just did this group assignment. What did you contribute?" That's one of the things that we tend to do as teachers. We say, there's 4 kids in this group. You ask each student, "What was your contribution?" And so one of the students, let's just call him Jose, he says, "Well, we made sure that we did the research, and we made sure that we had everything in order." And no, 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 Jose, what did you actually like? What did you do? And again, Jose goes back to, "Oh, well, we decided that we were going to." So now the teacher's making this assumption that either Jose probably didn't do anything, and so he's just saying we, but there could be something else underlying. He may come from a community, a collectivist community, where again, what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. And so he might be used to a situation where, I give you an example, and I talk about this in my book, where like when I grew up, the refrigerator, when you go in the refrigerator, every item in there, milk, eggs, whatever, my mom would be like, "Don't touch this, don't touch that, because I'm making pancakes tomorrow," or whatever it is. Every item in that refrigerator was allocated to something, and we had to ask permission. As an adult, the way I run my refrigerator, if you're hungry, just grab something, right? So it's all of our food. Sure, you might know something that my son might like or prefer, but I could eat it too, vice versa. So it's one of those situations where we have this idea of, if I'm hungry, and there's a bag of chips, I'm gonna get a bag of chips. I don't necessarily have to ask permission because I don't know if this is allocated towards something. So that Jose situation where he's used to a background where everything is ours, like we all did it. We all did it. And so there's some back and forth, and again, that can escalate to something else. So I see a lot of teachers struggle with doing collaborative learning for making their own biases and sometimes their assumptions on how the collaborative learning looks. So what I've been working on is a product that's going to make collaborative learning a lot easier. It's going to be fun, and it's engaging, and it's something that can be done online. I will be rolling that out in a few weeks. So I appreciate the preview that I can provide, but it's based off of those individual teachers that are saying, "Look, I realize when I do my classrooms, it tends to be individualistic, but I want to create a balance to where there's a lot of collectivism, and my collectivist students will thrive in this community as well." And so that's what this tool is for. It's fun, it's engaging, it provides challenges, and again, it gets everyone in that group involved. And I'll leave it there.
It's a good teaser, and I'm excited to check it out when it becomes available. You better message
Okay.
us when and where we can find it too.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah, so Sheldon, we're going to move into kind of the final parts of the program here, where we get into some lightning round questions, where we get to know our guest a little bit more here, and you're free to give short one-word answers, or you're free to elaborate to describe what it is that you mean. That's entirely up to you. So I think I get to start with the first one here. Since we brought up potluck earlier in the episode, so and you mentioned some of the things that you like to make here too, but what's your go-to potluck item when you actually go to a potluck dinner?
Go-to item is lasagna. However, I just got a Blackstone grill for Father's Day not too long ago. So I've been on these smash burgers, so that might be a close second.
Nice. Favorite place to go in Arizona?
Favorite place to go in Arizona is I go to the roller skating rink. I like to roller skate, so that's probably my favorite place. Every week I'm there.
Awesome. Do you got any cool moves?
I get down now. See, and so I'm not gonna, like, someone, I was actually talking to my staff yesterday about this because everybody gets surprised that Sheldon roller skates, and I don't do the derby. Like, respect, it's just not my thing. But yeah, I'm dancing and I'm grooving out there on the skating rink adult night.
Sure. How about what's your, a current book, TV show, or movie that you've been into?
So I like to watch this show on YouTube. It's called Pop the Balloon. It's Pop the Balloon or Find Love. They actually film it here in Phoenix, and so I watch them every Wednesday.
Right. I think I've seen clips of that maybe on YouTube
Yeah,
or
you
something.
probably have. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's toxic dating, but it's entertaining. So I do watch that.
Sure. What's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
I'm actually very introverted. People don't believe me when I tell them I'm quiet. I tend to turn things on for a time frame, and then after that, don't talk to me. Leave me alone. So I'm very introverted. I'm very private as well. So I keep a very small circle. So if you're in my inner circle, you know all about me. Outside of that, I am like I said, I tend to turn things on.
Since you mentioned the start of school coming up for some of us sooner than others, in your mind, what does purposeful leading, teaching, and learning look like as we enter this upcoming school year?
It's being intentional and not just trying to collect the paycheck, but really have the kids in mind. And when we have the kids in mind, that means that we are creating ownership with our students and not just telling them this is what we're going to do for the year, but we're also asking our students, what would you like to see this year? So I know we have standards, right? And so um, there's certain topics that we have to cover. That's just it is what it is. But how do you want to learn about these topics? And how would you like to teach some of these topics? That is what I would like to see when it comes to being purposeful and intentional with our work.
All right, Sheldon. So we're doing the conference tomorrow. You're our keynote speaker. What's your walk-up song?
I love Jackson 5. I Want You Back. That intro, like that is my intro song. I love that song.
Cool. Well, we have a Spotify playlist now for the podcast, so we will get that song added to the playlist.
Yes.
And just a few rapid fire here, this or that, and you've got to give us just either or. Okay.
Okay.
Are you a notebook and paper guy, or do you use an app?
Notebook and paper all day.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
Do you prefer mountains or beach?
Beach.
When traveling, are you listening to podcasts or music?
I would say probably podcast.
Do you prefer a text or a call?
Text.
And are you the first to leave the party, or are you the last one out the door at the end?
If I go to the party, I am the first to leave.
You
got to get me there first.
Yeah.
All right, Sheldon. Well, as a fellow introvert, I appreciate you sharing all that you did, and I just want to give you a chance. I know we talked about the app a little bit, but and that's coming out in a couple of weeks. Is there anything else that you want to plug as far as what you have going on for, website, socials, any of that type of thing?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at Sheldon Eakins, and that's SHELDON. My last name is EAKINS. So Sheldon Eakins on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn with the same name. My YouTube channel is Eakins Teaches. So that's where I have my podcast, Leading Equity, and you can find the videos there. If you're looking to collaborate in any sort of way, partnerships and workshops, keynotes, trainings, you can go to my website at purposeful247.com. And then the last piece is on August 13th, I will be doing my reveal. And so that's coming out on August 13th. So follow me online. You can get more information.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Sheldon. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheldon.